Hello and welcome to Hammerheads. This is the 8th episode of a series about the films of Hammer Horror, or Hammer Studios if you prefer. And we decided to go through the BFI list of 17 movies from Hammer, which was one a year between 57 and 74. So we are now on 1964, and I am Miles Watts, and this is my co-host, Mr. Marcus Wilson.
Good evening.
And on his lap is Kermit the cat, not the frog, the cat, which you won't see in this audio recording. But just so you know, there's three of us here.
And I can't see my notes anymore because he's standing in front of me. So.
Well, Kermit can weigh in with his thoughts on Bray Studios and the career of Peter Cushing, because I feel that Kermit is a sort of bit of an expert. He's just a bit hiding his light under a bushel, you know. But he's a very handsome cat, and he's sitting very prominently on the screen. Oh, bless him. I'm going to take a screenshot for my own amusement. There we go. Hang on. There we go. What is the film this week, Mr. Wilson?
Well, it's a little bit of a departure for Hammer. I suppose up to this point, they've been, using the old monsters of Universal Studios. Using mummies and vampires and Frankenstein and all of that. And this, at this point, I mean, they're well into the horror genre now, Hammer Studios. They've been working on this for a good, what has it been, 7-8 years?
7-8 years, yeah.
And they're starting to kind of reprise characters in films, and they've had a bit of a run of not so successful films. So we spoke about The Phantom of the Opera not so long ago.
Yeah.
And although we didn't think that was a bad film, it wasn't well received at the box office. And I think that the great Terence Fisher director, it was kind of a bit of a black mark against him as a director for a while. And then there were these other productions in, I think, 63, around 63, The Old Dark House, The Damned, and they'd been disastrous at the box office.
Oh, really?
And actually been shelved by their distributors, Columbia.
No, oh, that's tragic. When you've made a film and it gets shelved at the end of the process.
Yeah, so weirdly, this kind of great horror studio, fledgling horror studio, now turns to the cinema-going public to ask what they should do next, and they place an advert in the Daily Cinema magazine, and basically ask, has anyone got an idea to make a good movie?
That's funny. That's a side of desperation, but also, I guess it's a good bit of fan service if they're saying, look, please help.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're making a lot of movies each year. They're shooting a movie in sort of 8 weeks or something like that, so they're turning over a lot of content.
I can't imagine Marvel or DC reaching. Can you imagine James Gunn going on Twitter and going, hey guys, we need some ideas for our next movie? You'd just get people falling over each other to argue about who should play Batman. Yeah.
Well, I mean, anyway, they get a bunch of submissions. But there's this one story idea that's submitted by this person called J. Llewellyn Devine.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if that's a pseudonym.
Yes.
And it's a synopsis of a plot which basically places the Greek mythology kind of Medusa legend in a mid-European setting. And although the story was quite convoluted, Hammer decides that it actually could be reworked well enough to sort of set it as a gothic horror.
Yeah.
And it also gives them the opportunity, I guess, to introduce a monster of their own. They've been borrowing Universal monsters a lot from this stage, and not only that, but it's the first of their female monsters as well.
Yes, that's
true. A bit of a departure as well, and there will be more female monsters and vampiresses and things to come.
I mean, that's obviously not taking into account what's the fantastic actress who played that one of Dracula's, or
Oh yes.
She was phenomenal, and we talked her up, and now I can't remember her name, but she was in, was it Brides of Dracula?
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember her name.
But yeah, she was like obviously a second fiddle to the vampire. But yeah, this time we've got a villainess, haven't we, front and center.
And so John Gilling, I think, was asked to translate this story into a screenplay, which he does. Then Anthony Nelson Keys, I think, the producer, looks at it and doesn't like it, so
Yeah.
he changes a whole bunch of things again.
Yeah.
And yeah, hey presto, they have a filming script, and the studio are coming off the back of The Evil of Frankenstein. They have lots of interior sets built for that, which they can sort of reuse and redress for this film. It's set in around 1910. So they quickly reset all of that, and I think they start shooting in December 63 and finish shooting in January 64.
I love it. And I obviously, knowing now, because we've seen this is the 8th Hammer film we've watched in the series, we know the studio, Bray Studios, which is fantastic. And I've now got a terrible case of studio envy when I come to watch, because the vibe that comes across, especially in the Gorgon, is by now they are a theatrical company making movies, because it's like, it's a set, it's a stage. You might as well be making these for the theater, because they're theatrical sets that look terrific on film. But obviously they're using the same set. It's like, here we go. We've got that bit of, Dracula's balcony that they use the big staircase. And this time they've got the crumbling mansion, which is a sort of inside-outside set, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's as we've said in previous episodes, it looks like a set. It's a film set, but it's a beautiful film set. And I think it's particularly showcased in the Gorgon, because a lot of the plot revolves around going back to the old house. There's a mysterious creature there, and then, like you say, they start talking about, is it one of the Gorgonzolas? It certainly is cheesy. You've already made that joke earlier. In the email you said there's a link to the Gorgonzola. So yeah, what I really enjoyed about this film was the fact that it was showcasing that beautiful set design, production design, costume design. So it had that going for it straight away, I thought. Before the plot even started, I was like, oh great, I'm going to get to see these great sets again.
And the cast as well, because we've brought the band back together. There's Terence Fisher, and we've got Cushing and Lee.
Great to see Cushing
starring roles.
Yeah, as soon as Cushing appeared after 20 minutes or so, I was like, yes. And then after 40 minutes, you get Christopher Lee comes in, and it was like, oh.
And all in quite
now they're
different
all here.
roles too.
Yeah,
we've seen them in at Hammer before.
Yeah, especially Christopher Lee, because he was only in his sort of 40s at this point, 1964, and he plays an older character to what he actually was at the time. He's playing a guy, an old sort of fussy guy, because he keeps playing with his fake moustache, which I thought was a nice touch. And he's a slightly unconvincing wig. He plays an older guy who only meets Cushing in the last 10 minutes of the movie, which again was nice to see them together, but it took 70 minutes to get them together.
Yeah, and they only are in like a couple of scenes together. I think probably only one scene where they're actually talking to each other. I
know, which is a bit of a shame. Professor Karl Meister is Christopher Lee's character, isn't it? And Dr. Namaroff is Peter Cushing's character. And they sort of know of each other, but they only really come together at the end to solve the mystery of this, hag in a house. It's a hag in a house movie, isn't it?
It is, yes. And it starts in, I mean, although they're saying that the original script or story submitted was quite convoluted, it still remains quite a convoluted plot and script, because the first scene, for instance, we're introduced to these two characters. We've got Bruno Heitz, the son of Jules Heitz, who's kind of a womanizing artist, a bit of a libertine.
Yes,
his current lover, Sasha Cass. And they basically, I mean, it's a slightly saucy first scene that they managed to get past the censors. We have partial nudity.
We do have partial nudity.
But then those two characters that were introduced to in the first scene basically die and disappear for the rest of the film. So you've got those two characters, and then the rest of the film is about kind of the relationship between Heitz's father and Dr. Namaroff, who's Cushing.
Yes.
Then all these other characters kind of come in.
And basically, I thought Paul Heitz who looks a lot like he looks like David Hemming from Blow Up, but also looked like John Boy Walton. I thought. Yeah,
he has got quite a striking face.
Yeah, or almost in his publicity stills looks a bit like Jamie Campbell Bower, someone like that. He's just got a very good face, and he's just haunted by the fact that he's lost his half his family to this mysterious house, and he's determined to solve it. But what I loved about it was that it very early on sets up the idea that this is a woman who turns people to stone, because you see it happen, and then you see you see one guy goes in and gets just turned to stone, and it happens that not because I was talking about you with Clash of the Titans earlier with you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Clash of the Titans, which is a fantastic film, 1981. Ray Harryhausen did the special effects, the great stop motion genius, and he did all of the stop motion in that movie, including Medusa. And Medusa in Clash of the Titans is terrifying. There's a scene where Perseus goes in, and he has to try and cut her head off, because if he cuts her head off, and he can then show it to the Kraken and get his princess back, and the Kraken will turn to stone. But first of all, he's got to cut her head off. So he goes in, and there's all these previous soldiers who've been turned to stone, and she's terrifying. She's this terrifying stop motion creation. And if you look at her, you turn to stone. But if you look at her inner reflection, which Perseus does, he's got a magic shield, you don't turn to stone. But in the Gorgon, if you see her, as Paul does, if you see her reflected, you get very ill and your hair goes grey. And you go slightly mad. But if you look directly in her eyes, you gradually turn to stone, which was sort of an interesting thing. You're screwed as soon as you look at her, but then you sort of go home and gradually become a statue, which I thought was interesting. You got enough time to write a letter.
Well, that is quite some scene. Like Medusa, the idea of Medusa from Greek mythology is an absolutely terrifying idea.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in this film, we have a bit of that, the kind of plastic bat syndrome from some of the early films, that I think Christopher Lee said the only thing wrong with the Gorgon is the Gorgon.
Yes. The rubber snakes. Because when you first see her in a wide shot, it's got like half a dozen snakes in her head, and they're just going waggle, 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 waggle.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's comical.
There's lots of things to take issue with. So first of all, Carla Hoffman, there's a spoiler here, so turn off if you don't.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara Shelley, who plays Carla Hoffman. Carla is actually, it turns out, to be Megeara, or been taken over, possessed by Megeara. And yet Megeara is not played by Barbara Shelley. Megeara is played by a dancer actually called Prudence Hyman. So
Prudence Hyman, yeah.
There's no visual resemblance between Carla and the Megeara figure.
So you just think it's a different woman?
The plastic snakes are kind of stapled to Prudence Hyman's head, like to some kind of like shower cap.
Yeah.
And then controlled by lots of kind of wires that are kind of straggling behind her. And it looks a bit like, do you remember those like Play-Doh barbershop things?
I do.
Where you used to be able to turn the handle and like Play-Doh
came out of the follicles, yeah.
It was a little bit like that.
Yeah.
And
it did. It was quite bad, wasn't it? But like distractingly bad. You were like, oh, look at those waggly snakes.
But then also the thing that bothered me a bit, and maybe I kind of missed this, but I like my horror movies and villains to be to have some kind of logic behind them. Who are they terrorizing? Why are these particular people being turned to stone? And you wondered whether maybe she's got something against libertines or kind of the villagers or I don't know, the far left or something. It's like, but there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason between to the people. It just seems to be anyone who sort of stares upon her.
It does, and I think they that's the simplicity of it. Really, is that I think one of the reviews at the time said, "Well, at least it's not a vampire."
Yeah,
like
it's weird because the rest of the plot is very convoluted and lots of kind of interesting things happening. There's this whole kind of subplot of people in the village trying to bury this idea of the legend of Megeara. I don't know, maybe they're trying to open some kind of beach and they'll scare off the tourist or something.
They should have had the mayor from Jaws in there. It's a beautiful day and we're all having a wonderful time, and apparently a Medusa turned some people to stone, but we're forgetting about that.
And then we've got Cushing's doctor, who is obviously trying to cover things up, and we're not quite sure why initially.
Yes.
But a lot of that is kind of explained, and there's the Patrick Troughton. I think he's kind of quite interesting.
Yes.
chief inspector locally who just runs around trying to kind of hush things up. And
he was one of the strong points of the movie. The fact that they finally give Patrick. I don't know if they had but in the previous one we watched, he got a tiny little part as a watchman, didn't he? But he
yeah,
actually has a key role here as a copper.
so he's sort of trying to duff up Professor Heinz and things
That's right.
for trying to bring the village into disrepute and stuff. And
so do you know what? I love that scene where they basically kick his window in, set his lounge on fire, and then appear at the door and go, "Get out of here!" And he goes, "Get out of my house!"
And then suddenly the fire is out. It's like
the fire is out,
okay.
And the police are there, and he's like, "Well, where the fuck have you been?" And he's like, "Well, we're only a small police force," and it's like, it's just great. Yeah, that was good. All these little villager moments, because really the plot is, people keep going in that house and they keep seeing this woman and they keep dying.
Yeah.
That's the simplicity of the actual plot, whereas all the little mechanics of it are just are nicely set up. But like, who is the doctor and who is the professor, and what can he do about it, and all that.
There's a lot going for it, and they really create a world, that whole village.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think Barbara Shelley, who's obviously been in a lot of horror films as well, she advises them, you should cast me as Megeara as well, so there's some visual consistency, and she suggested that they actually use grass snakes and kind of tape them to, I don't know, staple them to her head or something. And she was prepared to do all of this, but they said, look, we don't have time to do this, because if you have to kind of change between Megeara and the Carla character, there's too much makeup to be, we've got a really tight schedule, tight budget. So
that's a shame, because they could have done it.
Yeah,
they could have done it, because when what's her name? Is it Pamela Hyman? When the older woman appears,
Prudence Hyman. Yeah.
Prudence, that's it. She's not in it for that long, and enough to make it much of an effect. And then at the end, when they finally sort of chop her head off, she just very quickly becomes Barbara Shelley again. So maybe
they nearly did actually chop her head off, because she was supposed to duck, I think, when Christopher Lee swung his
mighty sword.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the co-director or something had to push her out of the way to stop him actually decapitating her.
Yeah, don't cut her head off, Chris. That reminds me of the time on Lord of the Rings, when they because again, spoilers if you haven't seen Return of the King. Was it Return of the King? Yeah, Return of the King. But Saruman, which is Christopher Lee's character, gets stabbed in the back by Wormtongue, which is in the movies, not in the book. And Peter Jackson said to him, right, can you let out a gasp when you get stabbed in the lungs? And apparently Christopher Lee said, a man cannot let out a gasp when he is stabbed in the lungs, Peter. And he's like, remembered that he used to be in the Secret Service, or in the war. Christopher Lee he used to work for the government, and he was a spy. And Peter Jackson realized he's possibly stabbed a man in the lungs before. So he just let it go. That's fine. That's fine, Chris. Yeah, you're right. He just said, this is the noise you make, Peter. So he said, all right, do that. He said, the air is expelled from your lungs. So okay. You have it your way, Chris. But yeah, I think in this he's sort of between personas, because obviously he's been Dracula. He doesn't want to be Dracula again.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's playing quite a different character. Yeah. He's kind of quite charming, but also kind of quite, kind of a bumbling character as well.
Yeah, it's almost like, because I love his performance in The Wicker Man. I think he's absolutely amazing in that. I think that's one of his key performances, and he's just sort of giddily, majestically insane in that film. Lord Summerisle.
Yeah.
But in this, it's a departure from Dracula. He is more like a bumbling professor, but also very commanding and sort of sure of what he's Christopher Lee, isn't he? So you just believe every word that he says. And
then Cushing is also playing a bit against his usual type, that he's this very cold.
Very cold. Yeah. He's not avuncular. He's not scatty. Like, even if you think about, like, one of our favorite films that we bang on about all the time is The Beast Must Die. Yeah. And in that, Peter Cushing plays a very, affable, sort of eccentric professor like this. And he's not like that at all. He's just very, cold, like you say.
And we've got a lot of, like, doctors and professors all rubbing shoulders in this film, which sort of makes me think that there should have been more of a kind of some sort of more rational explanation for the existence of Megeara and kind of how people were going to turn to stone, or what the kind of
Yeah, that would have been interesting to have like a, a scene in a college or something with a bunch of professors going, you can imagine it, can't you? No, the thought of turning human flesh into stone is ridiculous. And someone going, well, here's, and having like a bit of an arm and going, this used to be human flesh. And so just some other dimension where they're trying to be scientific about, or they're trying, or there's a Greek scholar, an ancient Greek scholar who's trying to like, find Medusa, or just a bit more of that kind of stuff, because it was touched upon, and obviously they talked about.
Yeah, they sort of try and brush it to one side,
a little
kind
bit
of incongruity of it by saying, I believe in the existence of everything which the human brain is unable to disprove.
That's right. And Barbara Shelley then sort of remembering what she heard about, what she read about the Gorgons, and and she's sort of speaking it by rote, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, there was an element missing in that, I thought, because other films we watched in the series so far, they've always had like phenomenal, either quite comedy scenes in inns and taverns.
Yes,
Locals are good.
Right.
So I think one of the strongest elements was, like you say, it was the police, the police force. That was interesting, kept it interesting anyway.
It didn't have that kind of light comedic elements that we've seen in some of the other films.
Kind of it was missing, I thought. It was missing. Yeah, it was quite po-faced and serious. But it kept me watching, and it was interesting. And I thought, yes, the monster was cheesy and stuff, but it was creepy. I did like the sort of seeing Medusa's reflection in things, and it had that delayed effect. That was good. And just going in, we've got to go in that house, and it's like, yeah, but every time someone goes in that house, she's going to look at you and totally ruin your visit. So it had that sort of build up, and you were like, okay, when it got to sort of the last act and there was 20 minutes left, I was like, okay, yeah, it's going somewhere. There's going to be a showdown, like in Phantom of the Opera. There's going to be a showdown. Someone's going to die. I thought, I bet Cushing dies. And the hero will get his, revenge. And it sort of ends with him going, he's been avenged. It's like, you can be at peace now because you and all your family have been killed, but it's fine because we've cut the Medusa's head off. So you have that bittersweet ending.
There's that, as we've alluded to before, there's the slightly weird scene where Professor Jules Hines gets turned to stone and insists on sending his butler off so he can write a letter.
Yes, I know.
And tell his son about how he's been turned to stone, which I kind of think, why aren't you just quickly telling the butler who can pass this on to your son? He
obviously thinks his butler's a moron, doesn't he? I mean, his butler immediately starts crying when he's telling him, I'm afraid I'm screwed. He doesn't say that, but the butler's like, oh, okay, I'll go then. And he goes, I'm gonna, and then it cuts to a close-up of him like really trying to operate the fountain pen. It's like, don't use a fountain pen, for God's sake, you're dying. That's the worst thing to use when you're dying. So fountain pens. Get a pencil, for Christ's sake. I mean, this was 1960. I don't know how many pencils they had lying around. No, 1910 it was, wasn't it?
1910.
There you go. They didn't
carry
have
a pigeon.
Carry a pigeon.
Yeah. You still need to write a letter, though, I guess.
Yeah. But they could make it work in the Flintstones. They just like, you tapped something out and a pterodactyl would go and pass it on. But yeah, there were some unintentional comedy moments in this.
Yeah.
So it was sort of bordering, for a film that took itself very seriously, it was bordering on the ridiculous.
Something absurd.
Yeah, but it was enjoyable, and it did feel though like let's do something the same but different.
Yeah.
So we'll have a Gorgon in it. Okay. So you can't help thinking that if you replace the Gorgon with either a really good monster or just a better Gorgon, or a better Gorgon. We need another Gorgon. We're going to need a bigger Gorgon.
I'm wondering if they're going to ever ask the public to come up with a Horace Hammer script again.
Can you imagine?
Well, that was a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's like when they tried to get the film Snakes on a Plane made, and it was written partly by fans and like by about 100 different people, and it's like, that's why you don't get the public to write scripts. It really should be one or two people. And you shouldn't really ask what you people want, because it's always awful.
It's like Snakes on a Brain.
Very good. I didn't even think of making a joke about snakes, despite the fact that I mentioned Snakes on a Plane. You're very quick there. Snakes on a Brain. Let's just take a moment for that joke. Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
So like not one of my faves, but I think it was memorable. But again, it felt like it was a little bit, could have been a little bit more.
Need a bit of tightening up, maybe.
A little bit of tightening.
Bit more CGI.
For an 83-minute movie, it felt a bit long, which is not good.
Well, it felt as though there were kind of almost too many elements thrown in for an 83 minutes, so none of the elements could really be explored or kind of, yeah.
I don't remember any elephants.
No.
That would be good. A demon elephant in a cursed zoo.
Talking of that, next time.
Oh, what have we got?
Well, I'm quite looking forward to next episode because we're moving into Hammer horror, turning to psychological thrillers, and this feels a bit of a departure for Hammer, and maybe a bit of more like a modern horror.
Right.
Maybe not. Maybe just a horrible 60s psychedelic nonsense.
Yeah. But you know what? I'm really excited about that one, and the next couple actually. Without going into too much.
Fanatic next time, I should say.
Oh, Fanatic, yeah, and then Plague of the Zombies, don't we? But they are more in the sort of I suppose Lucio Fulci grotty 60s 70s horror where you've got maggots falling out of eye sockets and that kind of thing, which Hammer haven't done yet. So I think they're probably going to get it a little more daring, and they're probably all hopped up on acid at this point. I don't know if they are. Yeah, but I'm especially looking forward to Plague of the Zombies. Fanatic I don't know much about, but just because and again, for a zombie fan and zombie filmmaker, I've never seen Plague of the Zombies. And it's it's one of those that should fit
returning to the source.
Well, it's before Night of the Living Dead too, which is interesting. Yeah, it's a couple of years before that, so it'll be interesting to see what they did with zombies before, because up to that point it had been voodoo zombies and Haitian zombies and hypnotic spells rather than the living dead. But yeah, Fanatic. Who's in that one?
Fanatic. Oh, God knows. Right, it's Tallulah Bankhead.
Oh, amazing. Tallulah Bankhead. She
plays a religious fanatic with evil designs on her son's fiancée.
It's always evil designs, isn't it? It's never cool designs. Die, My Darling.
This is the American title, I believe.
Lovely. And the director, it is an Italian director.
Yeah,
Silvio Narizano. Tallulah Bankhead. Wow, what a ledge. Oh, Peter Vaughan, Stephanie Powers.
Oh, Stephanie Powers.
Donald Sutherland.
Oh, wow.
Shut the front door. And my grandma, Gwendolyn Watts, she's in it. Well, I'm really looking forward to that one. Writer, now I'm really excited about this, Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson is one of the most fantastic writers who ever lived. He did Incredible Shrinking Man. He did Duel. He did I Am Legend. He did just loads and loads of stuff like that. I mean, he's a brilliant writer. He does sci-fi and horror. And so I'm really excited about next week. It should make up for the fact that we were slightly disappointed by the Gorgon, but it's always enjoyable watching these films because partly because of the people that made them and the context, and even if they do have rubbery bats and snakes in it sometimes.
Stephanie Powers too. I'm off to watch Heart to Heart.
Heart to Heart. Now there was a show, wasn't there? That was great. What was the dog called? Freeway. Freeway. Hi, I'm Max, and this is Freeway. Oh my God. So there's an idea for our next series. We finished would be either Heart to Heart or corny series of the 80s that we loved at the time but haven't watched since, like Manimal.
Super. Right, we'll go and have a long hard think about that.
You go and have a long hard think, but yes, please do join us next time. We hopefully won't leave it as long next time because it's the new year and we're all back and ready to go. So join us next time for Fanatic and have a listen to the previous episodes if you like.
Subscribe.
Please like and subscribe.